Glastonbury was supposed to be the first Christian settlement in the country. Remember Joseph of Arimathea and the staff and the thorn tree and all that? Well, that may or may not be true, but when they built Glastonbury Abbey here, finished about 166, it was huge. It goes 50 yards that way and, or at least 50 yards that way, 70 feet longer than Westminster Abbey. And if you look at this column here, this pillar, the main tower was 3 times as high as that. Absolutely astonishing. Unfortunately, there was a great fire in 1184, and then Henry VIII came along and there was the dissolution, and there isn't very much left now. It was here that the bones of Arthur and Guinevere were allegedly reinterred. So if the great hero and heroine ever did exist, the truth might lie within these walls.
The bones of Arthur were dug up near the Lady Chapel, the other end of the building, about 1190 or 91, at a great depth. It is said on a tip-off from a Welsh bard who knew where Arthur was buried. They were enshrined, and later they were transferred, when the great church was built, to the tomb which is close to where we're sitting at this moment, during a royal visit. Then they stayed there until the dissolution, when everything was more or less vandalised and rifled and nobody knows what happened to them. What was supposed to confirm them as Arthur was that there was a lead cross with his name on it, which was supposedly dug up with the bones. And it's rather curious. Amongst the very last monks of the Abbey, one of them, John Thorne, one of the 3 who were put to death by the king, had taken the name Arthur in religion. It's normal to take a saint's name, but it is not all normal to take Arthur's name. So I suppose he was actually regarded as a saint here.
Yes.
I think he can be identified. But when you've done that, you haven't said all that much. Almost certainly the exploits of other men were attached to him, and the whole story snowballed.
The Abbey Barn, the Somerset Rural Life Museum, is one of the landmarks of Glastonbury. Here you'll find all aspects of country history recorded in an authentic setting. The County Council paid for the whole lot to be set up, but it's the volunteers who keep the place alive. There are actually no fewer than 80 volunteers connected to the museum. Some of them work in the cafe, some in the shop, some in admin. The research group has produced a series of information packs for local schools, each one focusing on a particular aspect of Victorian life in the town. When it came to agricultural history, the group particularly wanted to start by investigating the children who'd worked the land. Victorian clothes or furniture were more easily found than hard facts. School records, photographs, the census, and of course government reports were to give them the information they required.
We've used an agricultural report for Somerset which describes the type of work that children did, and of course they started from probably 10 or 11. They certainly were working full time, perhaps leading horses or doing fairly small kind of work actually on the fields, as well as clearing out cow stalls and stables and things. And you find some of that information in some of the accidents they happen, because they do get hurt, with some of the machines, because the machines were coming in. From the local newspapers, we've got a nice little piece about a 12-year-old, having fingers chopped off with a hay cutter, which is rather horrid.
This emphasises how labour-intensive was the work at the time. Here we have a gang of 10 people, a threshing gang. On the sack draped over the barrow there, it shows James Austin of the Abbey Barn, Glastonbury. Well, this place is one of James Austin's farms, and it's quite possible this gang would have come here to thresh their corn. The other part of this document shows a certificate we found in the archives of the museum here. This is a certificate presented to this Solomon Taylor of Glastonbury for 19 3/4 years' labour as carter to the farm of James Austin, Esquire. And he's presented with £2, almost a month's wages, so he would have been very glad to have that.
The main thing that happened in Butley was the feast day. Now that was always the 3rd Thursday in May, and the men in fact belonged, these are the farm workers, they belonged to the Friendly Society, Butley Friendly Society. That was a self-help group, And if you were ill, you were actually paid by the Friendly Society, because if you were ill, the farmer didn't pay you. They had just one day a year of festivities, and it was in this May Day. They met for a church service, and then they processed from farm to farm around the village, each of the farmers giving the men a drink of cider. So can you imagine what they were like by the end of the afternoon, when they then sat down to a large meal, probably about 4 o'clock in a farm barn? Women and children? No, just the men, just the club members. The women apparently observed.
The parish responsible for producing most of the cider was Boltonsborough, and Louise Clapp researched this area by starting with a 1930s OS map.
We have what used to be a thriving cider mill, just recently knocked down, and prior to that it was a tannery. But on this 1930s map it shows it as it was then. And particularly regarding the cider mill, we have some nice pictures with some of the staff. And I know that there are people who can identify those staff. But this is one of the prompts I use when I go round and speak to the elderly people. Do they recognise any of these faces? Can they give us a date for it? And from this, little memories come out. So they may say, oh, that was the blacksmith's daughter, and they lived up here in that house. And so we can proceed from there. And it does help us to build up a really good picture of the community during that period.
Because although you're starting with a map, which is in essence a dry thing,
it's a prompt,
you're bringing
yes,
it to life with the stories of the people, aren't
Absolutely.
you?
And we do find the elderly people enjoy that. It brings back memories. They point to individual houses that mean nothing to me and say, yes, that's where the baker was, and he did make good bread, and the butcher was there, but it wasn't always that good. And you know, little stories come out which help to build up a picture.
Many of the farm vehicles at Abbey Barn were rescued from fields or donated by well-wishers. One volunteer focused on transport in the Victorian countryside and showed me how ruts in early unmade roads were levelled off.
There are 3 areas of transport: the roads to begin with, and then subsequently a very short-lived canal, which was superseded by the railway. And that, of course, opened up Glastonbury to a much wider area. Although the coaches, in fact, did serve a very wide area and went almost daily, many of them almost daily, to most places in the West Country and up to London with the mail. So people were quite well served. The idea that people lived and worked in the same place all their lives is a myth, really. They moved about a lot more than we give them credit for.
The volunteers at Abbey Barn work with the local education authority in producing resource packs that cover all the key topics of the national curriculum. While many school children visit, most of the young people who benefit from the work of the volunteers may never come here. The Somerset Rural Life Museum is open all year round and can be contacted at Abbey Farm, Chilkwell Street, Glastonbury, BA 68DB. Telephone 01458 831 197. And the British Association of Friends of Museums can be contacted at the above address.
This is hemp. It's a plant that has for hundreds of years been crucial to the economy of this part of the world. It's very fibrous, and you can weave these either into rope, like this, or indeed into cloth. And there was an Act of Parliament in 1603 that said that the sail-making in the Navy had to be enormously improved, and the only way to do it was to use hemp sails. Now, just to give you some idea of how important it's been here, in 1791, the Reverend Collinson, just down the road in Yeovil, said that on market day, between 600 and 1,000 pounds worth of hemp products changed hands. Absolutely phenomenal. And in the 19th century, it was a worldwide trade. When the gold diggers rushed to California for the first gold rush, the first ever pair of Levi jeans were made of hemp. Unfortunately now, the plant's better known for its leaves than for its stalk, and marijuana is illegal. But the chap who runs this shop is keen to change all that. Tell me, what are the main industrial uses of hemp?
Okay, well, the plant basically supplies for our 4 basic needs of food, fibre, fuel and medicine. The seed of the plant is very nutritious, but it can also be compressed to make an oil which can be used as a base for lubricants, adhesives and paints. All of famous paintings, Rembrandt's, were all done on hemp oil, on hemp canvas. The word canvas, in fact, comes from the Latin word cannabis. Henry Ford actually built the framework of his car from hemp, sisal and wheat straw, and then fueled it from ethanol, which can also be fermented out of the plant.
Amazing.
It's an amazing plant with many uses.
What's history done to cannabis?
Well, for thousands of years, this was the most important crop to the world. Unfortunately, with the Industrial Revolution, we started turning against nature. The newly emerging petrochemical companies and pharmaceutical companies were very much threatened by this plant, and laws were introduced which have effectively banned this plant worldwide.
Queen Victoria's physician advocated the medicinal use of cannabis, but it was banned in 1928, and the argument between hemp and marijuana has been smouldering ever since. That's all we've got time for. But if you'd like to take your history a bit further, there'll be some details coming up in just a minute. Meanwhile, from Glastonbury, goodbye.